Welcome back. One of the things on this show that I want and seek are opinions from everybody. And sometimes opinions can be offensive to people, but there are times I don't agree with the opinions on this show, but they're opinions, and it's okay. I don't agree with my mom when I was a little kid, her opinions. My dad, I yelled at before. My sister and I don't agree. And sometimes it is hard. Somebody has an opinion, you don't agree with it, and in the moment it bothers you. I get that. But I like when people come on this show. One of the things I always tell my guests on this show is when you come to the show, bring your A game. Bring strong opinions. Don't worry if it's viewed as a hot take. That's a hacky phrase used by people who aren't interesting. And the blogs who bang on people for hot takes, interestingly, always put those hot takes on their blogs and they get the most clicks. In the end, have an opinion. Don't be a wuss. Stand up and fire away. I'm for you. I got your back. And so Charlie Weiss came on the show on our couch last week and said, listen, it's harder to win at Notre Dame. And this is what Charlie Weiss said. And he was a former coach. And this is what he said.
You need to know when you go in there, it's a different program. It's different. I mean, grades and going to school and getting your degree is going to matter. High character is going to matter. Okay, football is going to matter. I used to say in recruiting, it's like a pie. There's three things that are involved. Okay, character, academics, and can you play? And if you were missing any of those ingredients, okay, then you really can't play there.
Now, a lot of people think that's sort of pious and, Notre Dame, our character is great. Now, truth be told, I do think it's harder to win at Stanford, and I think it's harder to win at Notre Dame, and I think it's a little harder with the academic restrictions to win at Northwestern. I do. Full disclosure. There's not a lot of football championships for Stanford and Vandy and Northwestern. These are very, very good schools, and I do think it's harder. I think it can be overstated at times, but I do think it's harder. Joel Klatt, he came on the show. He's always got strong opinions. This is why I love Joel Klatt and why I think he's the most interesting, captivating voice in college football. He pushed back on Charlie Weiss on this show.
Listen, Charlie, and Brian, for that matter, Brian Kelly, academics cannot be an excuse. Go to the U.S. News top 30 universities in our country. Okay? Top 30. Of the top 30, you have 12 schools that play Power 5 football. Of the top 30, 8 of them had a better record than Notre Dame last year. Stop telling me, Notre Dame people, that academics are preventing you from being good. Did you know that Stanford's the only program in the country playing Power 5 football that has to get the student athlete accepted into their school before they can sign a letter of intent? They have to be fully accepted to Stanford before David Shaw can actually sign him to a letter of intent. Oh, but Notre Dame is too tough. We can't win football because of academics. Give me a break.
Also agree with that, is that I got the records here. The last 20 years and the last 4 Notre Dame coaches, they averaged 7.5 wins per year. That's not good enough, and that's not all on grades. Well, then Brady Quinn, who played quarterback at Notre Dame, he took exception to what Joel Klatt said. He got pretty feisty, and he said this on radio.
It's easy to say that when you're Joel Klatt and you went to somewhere like Colorado. And again, I'm not trying to degrade Colorado, but I can tell you the admission standards into Notre Dame are much greater than what he ever experienced. And I'm not sure when we made the U.S. News the source of data for all that information. It sounds to me more like a hot take than anything else. And if that's what you're into, that's great. But the reality of it is it's difficult to win at Notre Dame and Stanford and Northwestern and Vanderbilt. I'm not going to use the U.S. News as my basis for it because that wasn't my experience as a player who was actually recruited by those schools.
I can tell you Klatt doesn't do hot takes. Klatt comes in with a lot of work. In fact, I often have to tell Klatt, that's too complicated. My audience, that's too much. I'm not a big fan of Brady taking a shot at Joel, but now Brady's experience is it is harder to win here. So we've got Charlie Weiss saying, I coach Notre Dame, it's different. I think it is different. Not that much different, but it's different. We have Joel Klatt saying, stop making excuses. I agree with him. Notre Dame last 20 years, 4 different coaches averaging 7.5 wins. And then Brady Quinn says, I played there. It is harder. Back to Charlie Weiss, I do agree. I have always thought with Notre Dame is, I don't care what your opinion is, I think their fan base sometimes lacks perspective. If I was to tell you, Christine, I'm going to take a country, and we're going to take it my timeline is going to be 20 years and 4 prime ministers or 4 presidents. So I'm going to take like Canada, and I'm going to say, here's what I consider to be a fair representation of Canada for 20 years and 4 prime ministers. I think that is a reasonable timeline to kind of understand, does the country have a solid democracy? Is it run with a dictator? I mean, look at China for 20 years, 4 leaders, United States. That way, if you do have a crazy one, it doesn't necessarily, when you combine the other 3 in the 20 years, give you a one-sided look at a country or a football program. So I'm going to take Notre Dame for 20 years and 4 different coaches. And I think it's a reasonable level of consistency. Bob Davie averaged 7 wins for 5 years. Ty Willingham in 3 years averaged 7. Charlie Weiss for 5 averaged 7. And Brian Kelly for 7 has averaged 8, which moves the average to 7.5. Notre Dame has averaged 7.5 wins the last 20 years, mostly losing bowl games to good teams. I'll just throw that in. Let's take Wisconsin. I'm going to go back 20 years with 4 coaches. Barry Alvarez averaged 8.5. Brett Bielema, 9.5. Gary Anderson, 10. Paul Chryst, 10.5. They're averaging 9.5 wins per year in a conference where they can't schedule 4 or 5 of their games. Wisconsin is a better football program than Notre Dame. Wisconsin is also considered a public Ivy, meaning it's a really good school. Wisconsin is also geographically somewhat isolated, and Wisconsin's damn cold. Okay, Wisconsin right now is a better football program for the last 20 years than the last 4 coaches for Notre Dame. So I agree with Charlie and Brady. It is different. My pushback on Notre Dame has always been, you don't understand what you've become in 2017. You're about a 7 to 8 win program if you face a tough schedule. A few years ago, USC won 10 games. They had 3 coaches in utter chaos. You're not USC. You're not Alabama. You're not Ohio State. And now you are not Wisconsin. As long as Notre Dame players, coaches, alumni understand what they are. In the last 20 years, I have a list of 30 schools with the most 10-win seasons. Notre Dame's got 4. So does Washington State. Brigham Young's got 6. Kansas State, 8. TCU, 11. Virginia Tech, 12. I think where a lot of the rancor and opinions on Notre Dame sit is that they simply don't understand in today's environment what they've become. They're not the rotary phone. I'm not insisting that. But they are, for a lot of reasons, which Stanford has really smartly overcome. Some of it is Palo Alto is just beautiful, and if you go there as a recruit, you often sign there because it's unbelievable. It's one of the nicest places in the country to live. But I always come back to Notre Dame. Every program has a number of wins that you should on average win based on your weather, your academics. Are you rural? Are you urban? Notre Dame now is about a 7.5 win program. And I'll get nothing but hate mail on that. And that's what you've been for 4 prime ministers in 2 decades. Christine with the news.